Hello and welcome back to the Reapers. So we've had lots of requests asking, first of all, how to fly planes, obviously, and we are doing that in a series of how-to type guides, but there's so much to learn in DCS that it's going to take months and months to get all those videos out. And we've also been asked to do some simple videos on cockpits. And explained what all the dials do and stuff like that. So we're going to start doing that. They'll be a bit easier. But before we do that, we have to explain first of all the concept. If you're not into DCS already, the difference between high fidelity aircraft and low fidelity aircraft. So the main difference is in the US dollar price. So a low fidelity aircraft, like when I'm sitting in here, like an F-15, costs about $10. That's right, isn't it, guys? I think they're $10.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's $10. And the high fidelity aircraft, an example might be an F5 Tiger, costs more like $60. So a huge price difference. So let's go into what the difference between low fidelity, otherwise known as Flaming Cliffs aircraft, and high fidelity, and which we would prefer and why, etc. So this is a low fidelity. Now look at all these buttons and switches. It's exceedingly complicated cockpit. Look at that. It will take you literally a year to learn how to press every one of these, what they do, what you need to do if one of them fails, etc, etc. But this happens to be a low fidelity aircraft. That means that all of these switches on my left side here, all the hundreds of switches here, they don't do anything. They look pretty and they look just like the real aircraft switches, but you can't press them and they're not simulated at all. And again, if we go down here, all of this stuff, it's all just eye candy. There might be a few lights that buzz on and off, but essentially it's all just a model. They don't do anything. A lot of this front panel is working in a low fidelity model. For instance, these screens work and these dials work. We'll go into more detail in a further video. But basically only kind of 20 to 30% of the cockpit works. And also in a low fidelity model, a lot of the aircraft systems, internal systems, hydraulic systems, electrical systems, redundancy systems are not modelled. Whereas if we went over to a high fidelity model, every single switch you would see here is movable, toggleable, perfectly sampled. Even the sounds are sampled of switching them from the real aircraft. Every single switch that you press has the exact simulation effect as it does in the real aircraft. As well as that, the systems of the plane, like I said, the electrics, the hydraulics, the redundancies, etc, 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 are all modelled. And that's the difference. And that's why the high fidelity ones are so expensive, $60 each, because all that extra work has to go into simulating what the plane does and how it reacts. As to the actual flight, both the low fidelity model and high fidelity are roughly the same. Low fidelity is not as accurate, but within the realms of what you'll really notice, they're essentially the same. So an F-15 here flies essentially as realistic as an F5 Tiger, within reason. My personal opinions on this, I mean, high fidelity flyers who only fly the high fidelity models tend to look down on the guys who fly the low fidelity because they're not as accurate. I don't really agree. I think both have a place in DCS. If anything, I'd like to see more low fidelity. So the problem is a low fidelity plane like this, and the other examples of the low fidelity are the Flanker A, the Flanker D, the MiG-29, and the A-10A. They're all low fidelity like this. They're easy to learn, they're easy to pick up, and for guys just entering the DCS world, that's good. Easy is good, because even when I say easy, this is still a pretty complicated thing to learn. There's still tens of controls that I have to learn, not hundreds, but tens of controls I have to learn. Whereas if it was only high fidelity models, all but the most screeching autistics would essentially be put off straight away, because they're just so bloody complicated.
And that's why we're here.
And that's why we're here, yeah. So the typical thing you do in DCS is you come in, you start with these low fidelity models. They're cheap, they're easy to get into, they're easy to learn, easy to have fun with. And then once you've done a year or 6 months or 2 years or whatever you need to do, you start going to the high fidelity models, spending the money and becoming more realistic. And the only downside of my high fidelity model is great. It's great having perfect realism. It's great. The only downside is that, as we found out, the human brain, certainly my human brain, can only learn so many high fidelity models. So I've got about 5 at the moment, and learning them, especially I'm nearly 40 years old. As you get older, learning stuff becomes exponentially more difficult. I'm struggling. I'm picking up the vegan at the moment and trying to learn it. It's so bloody difficult. So there's a limit to how many high fidelity models you can learn to fly well, but low fidelity models you could essentially learn to fly 100 of these in probably a year because they're just pretty easy. So that's my 2 cents on the situation. Skay and Sherman, anything you'd like to add on the high fidelity versus low fidelity model and what it means to our watchers, I suppose, is the most important thing.
So a little bit of background. Once upon a time, there was a set of products before DCS was a thing called the Flaming Cliff series. The Flaming Cliffs products, we know them in DCS, are essentially upgraded versions of the product called Flaming Cliffs 3, and that's why they exist. Eagle Dynamics essentially took the decision to retain the low-fidelity modules in the game as an introductory step into DCS for people who don't want to immediately go the whole 9 yards. Myself included, although I went straight to the A10C.
Roger. So just to confirm, low fidelity is the Flaming Cliffs planes that they brought across?
Yes. Which includes everything from, as you mentioned, SU-27, 33, all the way to the MiG-29.
Also, I agree with Cap in the sense that I don't feel that the FC3 models are necessarily inferior to the full ones. Because also a function of all the, especially the Eagle and the flankers, a big part of their design is in simplifying the controls for the pilots.
Granted, yes, HOTAS systems are very important to modern fighters.
Yeah.
You'll see it on the F-18 as well.
Yeah, but the biggest drawback to them is the depth of the system modeling. Like, you can't do anything about the radios. You can't really change a lot of the settings that you normally would, like on the MFDs. You're basically just given the basic essential avionics you need to fight, and it fights really well.
Yes, and as a result, the system isn't necessarily 100% realistic. So as Cap mentioned, if you're into full-on realism, then the aircraft won't do it for you. Go have one look at the forums about which variant of the F-15 it's supposed to simulate, and I need not say more.
Yes, it's true. It's two sides of the fence here, isn't it? One of my complaints about the high fidelity models, as great as they are, is that when it comes to our group, where everyone's required to fly multiple models, you get situations like where Bloodknock, one of our main guys, he learned the Vigan, and because it's so expansive learning the Vigan, every switch and whatnot, he can literally only fly that one plane. So you'll only ever see him in that plane, which is really difficult for our group. And that is because it's so complicated. It's essentially learning pretty much what the real pilot has to learn, isn't it? Every single switch, every redundancy system. And that does limit the amount of high fidelity models that you can learn unless you're a super brainiac. Anyway, we won't drag this out any further. Thank you for watching that. That explains that. And what we'll go into next is a series of cockpit videos just showing what the dials and stuff in the cockpit do. So at least you know the difference between low fidelity and high fidelity models, which we will explain, we will introduce the planes as we go through them. So thank you for that, and see you later.